Welcome back to Pace Immigration, paceimmigration.com, talking with immigration lawyer Andy Semotiuk. Andy, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Sean.
We're talking today about the top 10 ways that you can improve Canadian immigration. Not necessarily you, although these are your ideas, but what the Canadian government can do to fix up Canadian immigration, especially when it comes to delays. These top 10 are taken from your Forbes article, and we're going to go through them one by one. But I thought it would be handy to throw up a few headlines. People might be saying, what do you mean? Canadian immigration doesn't need to be improved, does it? Okay. Andy, these headlines show that there's a big problem with delays, isn't there?
There is indeed, and I'm glad you picked up these headlines. I think you got a story even to tell about that. Tell us the story that you were relating to me earlier.
Okay, so in terms of the passports, not necessarily immigration per se, but people just getting passports, we have here a headline: Service Canada increases staffing at passport counters, but long waits persist. I often work at a place just up Yonge Street. I get off the streetcar at King. I start walking north, and there was this long line of people, some of them on air mattresses, some of them on lawn chairs, and I couldn't figure out who they were. And finally, on Instagram, a friend posted they were in this line. And I said, what is that line? It looks like people are waiting for concert tickets. And no, they're waiting in line. Sometimes they get there at midnight or 2 in the morning to wait for the passport office to open at around 8 or 9 in the morning so they can try and get a passport. That's how many long lines and delays they are for passports alone, let alone for something you know a lot about, trying to get citizenship.
Yeah, something similar happened to one of the people in our office. The husband needed a new passport. He went out to try and get the passport at 4 in the morning, found out he couldn't get it, went the next day, 3 in the morning and 2 in the morning, finally got it. But it's like that. The number one problem in immigration by far is processing times. That's the most frustrating thing that people face. And anything that can be done to improve processing times is key.
Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. And as you can see, another one of the headlines here, with refugees feel forgotten as Canada's immigration backlog sits at nearly 2 million applications. And I believe the number of refugee applications is somewhere over 100,000 of those. So 2 million applications backlog. Andy, have you ever seen anything like this in Canadian immigration?
No, it's really bad. I know the government's trying to do something about it, and hopefully some of the ideas we share might help them along in that way. But there is need for improvement here.
Right. So let's get right into it. We've got number one, you've got here changing forms. Give the immigration community advance notice. And by forms, we're talking about all those things you have to fill out, the different letters, put names in here and all that. And I've heard you say before, sometimes they change those forms on a whim and you don't know about it.
Yes, it's a big deal because sometimes we have filled in forms, sent them in, they send them back because something missing. When we send in the package again, we find out the forms have changed. The forms we submitted were out of date. We have to change the forms. So that causes delays, needless delays. And the solution would be make sure you give it enough advance notice before you change a form. That way we can all adapt and we don't get the surprises.
Right. Let's go on to number two. Stop returning all incomplete submissions. Instead, ask for more information. So I put it to you, is this what happens? You maybe someone, a clerk or whoever, even just someone trying to do it on their own, submits a form. They forget to write in maybe their middle initial or something. The whole thing just gets tossed back to them without even a chance to correct it? Yes,
that is exactly the problem. No common sense. A simple phone call. In the old days, they used to do it, but I don't know why they abandoned it. You'd get a call from Vegreville, Mr. Semotiuk, on your form such and such, you're missing such and such. And I give it to them on the phone. They write it in and the application goes ahead. But these days, if there's an issue, the entire package gets sent back to you.
Wow. Okay. And moving on to number three, consolidate the fee payment procedure. Why should each government office have a different payment policy? What do you mean by that?
Well, for example, depending on where you're sending the application, you pay to a different body, meaning there's not one place to pay the government, the federal government. You have to pay these people wherever you're sending the application form. And even in the place where you're sending the application form, there can be two places, depending on what you're sending in and what you're trying to do, where you have to pay two different agencies for the same process. So the idea is consolidate where you make payments. Why should we have to pay all over the place? Why can't we just pay in one place and then get a receipt, which we can include with whatever it is that we're trying to get?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me. Even a website, or you're filling out a check or something, it should just go to like Immigration Control Canada, and that's the end of it.
Right, right.
Okay. Moving on to number 4, improve the function of the national call centers. When I was reading your article, I was amazed that this could happen. I guess I shouldn't be, but no more 90-minute waits, getting cut off, or simply not taking calls on that day. Are there some days you call in and you simply just don't get an answer?
It can happen. I can't always say that it's a problem to get through to the National Call Center, but there are times, like it's not. I'll tell you something. Phone John Hancock in the United States. See what a proper company answering the phone sounds like. You can't get more than 3 rings and you get to someone in person, live. That's the kind of service we really need at the national call centers. There should be people there all the time ready to answer within 3 phone calls. It's doable. What we need for the government to do is follow some of these people like Amazon or people like Toyota, the Toyota way. This has all been sorted out before. There are people who know how to handle these processing issues. It's just a matter of calling those people in to ask for advice about how to spruce things up.
Right. And hiring enough staff to handle it as well.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Number 5, introduce clear one address contacts for all immigration processing offices. Take people through this a little bit. I have a feeling a lot of people out there would think like there's one address in Ottawa where all this stuff is going.
No. For example, there's an office in Sydney, Nova Scotia, where you send certain, employment-based things. There's an office in Ottawa, like, the passport office has got its office. The skilled worker applications go to their own offices, and so on. And instead of somehow centralizing all this, so you send, because what happens is you send things to the wrong office. I'll give you a clear example. The Canadian Consulate in New York has a visa application center. If you send your application to the consulate, they send it back to you. But the visa application center works with them, and it's simply a matter of sending your letter down the street to the visa application center. But they don't do that. They send it back to you. So you send it to New York, they send it back to you, then you have to send it to New York again. The problem, there's not one clear address. There's 2 addresses in that particular instance. And this is all over the place. The problem being, why bother with all these offices? I know that so if you centralize it, they're going to have to distribute the packages everywhere. But at least it's them distributing them to the place where they know it's right, as opposed to us guessing whether the address is the right one or whether it should be another one, etc. That's the problem.
Yeah, I could even see, if they want you to pay more for that, then fine. They could increase some fees to cover that. Or if they wanted to charge you a penalty, say you send it the wrong one, but at least they forwarded it on without having to send it back to you. I could see that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Number 6, adopt a one file number system for each client to eliminate confusion and duplication of filing. Why use multiple file numbers to track a file? You would think that Andy Semotiuk 1011 would be the end of it, but it sounds like there's more than that.
There isn't. There's a lot of numbers. I myself, I'm a lawyer, and I sometimes cannot figure out which number is the right file number. For example, they issue a visa, and you don't know it is the visa number. There's 3 numbers on the visa. So how do you know which one is the right number? And there's this universal client identification number in theory, but you have to there's that number, and then there's another number that they can refer to depending on what the application is. So you got this multiple number system. for dealing with these applications. Again, a centralized one number for everything about, for Andy Semotiuk, if I can have a social insurance number, I can have an immigration number that will deal with everything to do with my immigration matters. That's what I think we need.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Number 7, checklists for all applications with documents identified by name and number. Talk about that a bit.
Well, they do have, in some instances, many instances, they have checklists, and they list what the document, what the checklists are for, etc. But they don't match them up with the name of the document. They have numbered documents. So part of the challenge is you have to go to figure out which checklist applies to which application. It's not named, it's a number. It's sort of like, it's like you have to, it's a guessing game. It's like you have to figure out is your number associated with this application or that application, or which application exactly are we dealing with? Meaning the checklist has to be better identified with the application we're talking about. And the challenge here is they have a list of everything. There is a place where you can find whatever document you want. But the problem is it's not indexed. So it's like if you want to, if you've got a big book and you want to find what passage you're looking for and you don't have an index, you got to be searching through the book to figure out what page is it on. We got this problem. What page is it on? The problem is we don't have an index for these checklists. Okay.
Number 8, respect the right to counsel as represented by the use of representative forms. Talk about that.
Well, there's this principle that immigrants do not have the right to counsel at the border because they're not citizens, they're not permanent residents, they're at the border. And in some instances, maybe that is the right way to go. But in my view, if, for example, a Canadian is sponsoring a spouse and that spouse is at the border, there's a Canadian interest involved. And in that instance, I believe the spouse should have the right to counsel. Similarly, if a Canadian employer is sponsoring a foreign employee to come to Canada to work for them, again, there's an economic interest of a Canadian involved. And again, I believe the right to counsel should apply in circumstances like that. But right now it doesn't. I can give you an exact example. I flew to India once to help a Canadian husband who sponsored an Indian wife to come to Canada. And I was at the High Commission in New Delhi to represent the woman. And of course, the objection came up, well, you don't have the right to counsel here. You have no right to be here. They were kind enough to allow me to sit in on the meeting. But that objection was raised. That should not be an objection, in my view.
Right.
That should be a right that spouse should have.
Yeah, I mean, when it gets down to that stuff, where there is a direct Canadian interest involved, it's not like you're dealing with someone who just showed up, is it? I mean,
No.
They have a Canadian, like an employer or a husband or a spouse or wife sponsoring them. Obviously, there's a Canadian connection there.
Yeah. And I might just add this other sort of problem with the right to counsel. We have these use of representative forms, but sometimes the government doesn't bother to respect the form. Normally in agency law, if I appoint you as my lawyer, from that moment on, and I notify the other lawyer that you are my lawyer, from that moment, that other lawyer no longer has the right to contact me directly, but must contact me through my agent lawyer. And that's to protect people who are, infirm or who are vulnerable. That's what this is all about. Appointing a counsel is to ensure that your rights are protected. When the government ignores the use of representative form and sends documents out to clients without even copying lawyers, there's a problem there. They're not following what is the traditional right to counsel situation, even though that's not a border thing. That's even inside the Canadian border, when they just decide they're going to, send letters out to the clients, ignoring the use of rep form.
And not to mention, again, goes back to everything we're talking about. It saves a lot of time by contacting you, the lawyer, because you can handle things quickly because you know how things work instead of the client reading this letter, then having to get in touch with you, then trying to take care of it all.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Right.
okay. Number 9, introduce a simple administrative appeal system, such as a motion to reopen.
Yeah, that's what they have in the United States. If someone's going to deny your application in the United States, after they deny, you can still bring a motion to reopen and correct whatever the problems are before the case is completed. In other words, you have a second chance to correct what's wrong. I think Canada needs the same kind of a system, an opportunity for cases that are being denied, in some instances at least, to be reopened, to add whatever evidence is needed or to correct whatever mistakes were made in order for the case to be reconsidered and approved.
Okay. And number 10, teach government officials to employ a more substance over form mentality. This is going back to what you mentioned before, which is common sense, but it can be pretty hard to teach that, can't it?
Yeah, common sense is at the root of all of this. Look, I get it. It's not easy to, do. They got this massive amount of work with these forms. You got all the, millions of people waiting for applications to be approved and so on. I think the number one thing that they could do in terms of improving processing is teach the officers to use common sense, to make decisions based on common sense so much, more so on common sense than on the mere, does the form fit the situation, or, is this exactly the right thing, in terms of how it's submitted? If in substance it makes sense, if the principle of what is involved is being satisfied, does it really matter if it's black or white? If the substance makes sense and the applicant has filled in what is required in order to get a positive decision. Common sense.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me a little bit of that scene. I know this is kind of maybe throwing a weird one at you, but it reminds me of that scene in The Godfather where the young boy, Vito Corleone, he ends up at Ellis Island, and the visa officer says, "What's his name?" And the adult says his name is Andolini. From Corleone, and the visa officer writes down that his name is Corleone, and so for the rest of his life he's known as Corleone. But substance over the forms and whatever. Here's the kid; he's allowed in. Let him in.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a plea for common sense, I guess, is where we're at.
Right. Have you seen The Godfather, by the way?
Yes, I saw both. Yeah. Oh, it's a great.
All
film.
3. You just liked 1 and 2. You didn't like part 3. The top 10 ways to improve Canadian immigration with Andy Semotiuk. You can find the article in Forbes if you'd like to take a deeper look. Andy, we'll talk to you next time. Maybe we should cover maybe the top 10 ways for U.S. immigration next.
Oh, that sounds like a good plan also.
Okay, we'll see you soon, Andy. Bye-bye.
Bye, Sean.